I think the best thing you could probably teach a graduate is almost to take the emotion out of what they're doing and actually to think about it very rationally and to use very intellectual arguments to kind of describe the work that they've created. So you're not kind of saying, I did this because I think it looks good. There's a very solid kind of rationale for why you've done something the way that you've done it.
Hello and welcome to the third season of the York Creatives podcast. Your chance to hear from the artists, designers, storytellers and business owners who make up York's creative community. My name is Ben Porter. I'm a photographer, musician and the founder of York Creatives. In this episode, I speak to Johannes Grimmond. Johanness is a graphic designer with 17 years experience working across a wide range of brand identity, environmental and digital projects. In 2014, he joined the internationally acclaimed design agency Pentagram as a senior designer, working as a key member of a small team led by Harry Pearce. In 2017, he was made an associate at Pentagram. Johannes, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for doing this with me. There is loads that I want to unpack with you. But before we get too heavy into the design stuff, I wanted to start about asking about your Instagram. So this is your personal Instagram,
Okay.
Not the one with your commercial work. And when I was looking through doing some research, I got this sense that you are someone who looks at the world in quite a playful way. You've got a bit of a sense of humour and you're someone who sees patterns where other people might not see it. Is that a fairly accurate description?
That's come a bit out of left field, but possibly, yes, possibly. I think partly something you do as a graphic designer is look for relationships between things that might not necessarily be apparent, and perhaps that's something that comes across in my very shonky Instagram. I'm not sure. I'll take the compliment, but I'm not. Yeah.
Shonky is not a word I would use at all. So for me, I look through loads of people's Instagrams. Obviously, as a photographer, you can tell straight away when someone's got an expensive camera and if they know how to use it. But then what I find almost more impressive sometimes is when someone is just using the phone and they still manage to tell a story that makes people feel something. Because so many people take photos, they just document things that happen every single day and you think, oh yeah, great, but you don't feel anything. And then every now and again you get someone like you who manages to frame something in a way that just makes me think, life is fun. There are these playful moments that appear here and there. Is that a conscious thing that you ever think about, or is it just whatever you see coming to mind and you think, oh, that's funny, I'll take a little memory of that?
I think actually what it probably is just a kind of love of happy accidents. In fact, actually, an appreciation of happy accidents, I think, is one of the important skills you could probably develop as a designer, because I think so much of the great stuff you do is just comes when you're really not trying to do it, or you're just thinking about something else, and somehow it's just that thing like the cube will just kind of align and it will all come good. And I kind of think being really open to unexpected kind of outcomes is definitely a really important thing to try and nurture.
Yeah, but that's the whole point of creativity, isn't it? It's taking something and thinking of a new use for something that it wasn't perhaps intended for.
Definitely.
So do you want to tell people what you actually do for a living? Because it's not photography.
Well, I would just say I'm essentially a graphic designer who's been doing it for quite a while and done it for some quite well-known companies. And that's essentially it.
And how long is quite a while?
So 17 years I've been since I graduated in 2005. And that's definitely been quite a journey, and definitely something I've always wanted to do. So even before I kind of did it as a job, it was just something that, since I knew what it was, I kind of thought this is what I want to do, and that goes back to a really, really kind of young age. So yeah, just really kind of feel kind of lucky to be doing that for a living, and it's something I think I'm as passionate about now that I was when I started. So
let's go back to that young age then. Was there a particular inflection point where you remember something pushing you towards a creative path?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a few things. I think some things which particularly relate to graphic design. So like my uncle is actually really quite a talented graphic designer, and I remember at their house he had bought for my cousin like this book on perspective drawing, and I'd seen all the things that he could do, and then suddenly kind of looking at this book, it was almost like, oh, there's a formula for this. There's an approach that you can take to kind of make these amazing things. So you can use two vanishing points, you can draw a cube, it suddenly looks 3D, you can turn that into a wagon or a street scene. And that was kind of really like electrifying for me. And I remember he was giving my cousin some lessons in that, and I was just too young. I was only like 5 or 6 or something, but I was really kind of interested in what he did, and I saw this. And I just wanted, like they would leave that book on the table and I'd be like looking through it and I'd just be like, this is amazing. I'd be trying to, just in a really kind of haphazard way, trying to kind of copy that and, you know, trying to emulate that kind of approach. And that thing between, I think between creativity, but with underlying principles is something I find like really, really exciting. And then beyond that, there was also, again, just a really simple thing like an Osborne book, like, you know, those old Osborne like children's books, that's like really basic how to draw lettering. And I kind of got that when I was maybe like 7 or 8. And again, that was just thinking about some of the things that I'd seen like my uncle do with like lettering and typography. And that just immediately appealed to me. And I spent like a whole family holiday. We took that with us, and I was just sitting in the garden of this cottage we were staying in, and I was just like copying out lettering, and it was just completely like, this is it's so weird to kind of find something like that at such a, you know, a fairly young age. But I just think from that point that was just something that really, really, really excited me. And there's actually weirdly, almost to expand on that, is something like in all the jobs we do now, there's always like a piece of a kind of custom type treatment, whether it's a logo type, whether we make an entire font, you know, from scratch. But it all kind of, I've always gravitated towards that kind of thing. And I've always been like, when there's some type to modify or some type to draw, I've always really wanted to kind of have my hands on that. And yeah, it's still kind of doing that today and still just loving that. So it's, thank you, Osborne, I suppose.
So why is it important for you to get your hands on? Because thinking from a business sense, if you don't have to do that, then it's loads quicker and you would probably make more money. So why is it important for you to get hands on?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't mean hands-on as in actual drawing with my hands, but I mean get my hands into the computer software to do it. But it's just something, it's so weird because I will always have an opinion on that. And whenever I'm seeing someone else doing it, I always think, oh, can I have a go? You know, let's see what I'll, you know, and it's just driven by something that I think typography, that's a really important thing to me. And in terms of what I do, and I just think it's something you can never master. It's something, it's all about tiny details. And the more you do, the more you can just kind of learn more and more. And every single thing that I've done, actually, I can look back on now and just cringe because there's mistakes in every single thing I've done, and it's and I just don't tell anyone about them, but
that's life, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And all you can do is just do the next one better, and you know, just keep pushing that. And yeah, it's.
I once heard somebody describe creativity as mark making, and I thought that was I never heard it put in that way before. And when I heard that, I thought, oh yeah, we're all trying to make a mark on the world, and we can do it through many different art forms. But going back to the thing of, okay, you can always do it cheaper and easier and make more money. But actually, if that's not your end goal, if you're not just doing it to make money, if you're there to try and enjoy life and say, I'm creating things which I can share with people, that becomes the primary focus. And then, of course, you're going to want to get your hands on it. Of course, you want to play around with things and make your mark.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I do look at it like that as well. Not necessarily wanting to leave my mark on the world, but not being satisfied unless I feel I've done something as well as I, you know, possibly can within a piece of work. And as we always kind of, that can lead to working long hours. It can just lead to revisiting things when everybody's just kind of gone, no, just let it be. And you just want to sort of change the shape of a certain character or something. It's, so I definitely agree with that. I think if it's driven by passion, or it's driven by something that you kind of love to do, it's still work and it's still challenging. And I think this idea of creativity being this, you know, wonderful thing until you start trying to sort of flog it to make a living, and then it's something quite different.
So were you ever concerned at the beginning that you might lose the interest if you tried to do it for a living?
I think I got a real shock after I graduated, and I think a lot of people, particularly graphic design, because I think there is a really kind of predefined career path for graphic design. Like I think a lot of creative disciplines, it's not so kind of well defined, but I think with graphic design, you know, you graduate, you join a company, and then there's universally understood stages within that. You might be a junior designer, you might be a creative director, but you kind of move through a more or less predefined path. And I think after I graduated, I got a real shock because suddenly you're trying to apply this kind of quite broad creative thinking that you've kind of developed at university in this very kind of hard commercial setting. and I don't think you necessarily graduate with the right skills to do that, or I know I didn't. So I think that was probably where I had my greatest kind of doubts, was just, can I actually do this? Because you're going into a design studio and you've got a fixed amount of time really to get something done, and you're not really sure what you're doing. And depending on the environment, and I think Pentagram is really good at this, it's a really nurturing environment, but I think some studios I've worked in where it can be really hard-nosed, and it's really difficult to sort of try and hold on to this kind of quite almost naive sort of passion that you have, that you can just go and create lovely things all day, when actually you've all these different people are going to input into that. And
sure. So do you feel university set you up well for the career?
In terms of thinking, yes. In terms of practical skills, I think no. And I think that's actually a really interesting thing in design education, particularly in graphic design education. You get taught to think, but you don't necessarily get taught how to do. And we have a lot of, we still now, we have interns and graduates who come to us, and you can see they're brilliant, and you can see their thinking is absolutely fantastic, but you just think, wow, there's so many of these just basic things that that's just your job then, isn't it, to guide them through it in a really kind of nurturing way. But it is funny how people can be conceptually very prepared, but technically quite poorly prepared.
So if you were to teach those people the things that have been missing, what would be most important to teach them?
I think it's just technical things, and I think that's the thing, anybody can learn technical stuff. I think as long as if you've got a kind of mind to set out and achieve that, I think you can learn that. So, it's just all the technical things. It's just basic things like using programs, setting up grids. It's just really basic stuff that you just don't cover or we didn't cover on my course anyway.
So I guess one thing I want to pick up on was you said people are taught kind of well to think conceptually, and then they come and there's a few things which lots of people seem to get wrong. And kind of applying that back to when you mentioned the challenge of applying creative thinking to specific business needs and commercial objectives, do you feel there's an area there where perhaps we should be doing more in university to teach people about how the commercial world works?
Possibly, yeah, possibly. I mean, I think that's a really hard thing, and I kind of think that's a really interesting tension within graphic design as well, is the fact that I think one phrase I heard to describe it was, we work in variables, but we're driven by absolutes. So we're driven by deadlines, we're driven by specific, business criteria. And yet what we do, there is no real formula for kind of creating a solution that really resonates. And I'm not sure whether that's something you can teach in university. I think that's something that you almost do have to pick up along the way. And I think that's probably the biggest kind of initial pressure point that a designer has upon graduating, is that they're kind of hit with the kind of commercial reality of having to kind of meet real kind of hard business needs. And that's a really tough thing to overcome. But I think if you can do it, I think the more you learn to do that, and I think the more you learn to apply kind of formulaic rational thinking to creativity, I kind of think that is, to me, that's the essence of what design is. It's creativity, but it's in service of very kind of rational objectives. And actually, just to expand on that a little bit more, I kind of think the best thing you could probably teach a graduate is to almost to take the emotion out of what they're doing, and actually to think about it very rationally, and to use very kind of almost rational or more intellectual arguments to kind of describe the work that they've created. So you're not kind of saying, I did this because I think it looks good. There's a very solid kind of rationale for why you've done something the way that you've done it. And I think the minute that you can do that, then you're kind of talking to clients in a way where you're not just asking them to judge something for its aesthetic kind of merit. You're kind of saying, well, I've understood this about you, I've understood this about your business. I believe this is the right solution because, and you can just make a very rational argument for decisions you've essentially made creatively. And I think that's to me, that's the real kind of skill, that if you could, the quicker you can get a graduate to remove that kind of layer of emotion and just think much more rationally and almost intellectually about the creative output, I think that's a good thing to learn.
Yeah, that's super useful, because there are so many people who get into graphic design because they see these things out there and they think, these are beautiful, I want to make beautiful things. And making beautiful things is one thing, but actually you've got to solve a real problem for a real business for them to want to pay you.
Exactly that. It's exactly that. Yeah, like you almost think you'll be designing album covers all day, and then you kind of realise that it isn't that. But I think it's almost more satisfying because of that. I think all design is probably, you can summarise as problem solving. You have to solve a specific problem, and I think that to me is actually the thrill more than creating something that's beautiful. It's creating something that works really well and is kind of super effective, and helps a client kind of achieve a certain objective. I think that for me is where it lies.
So was this a shock for you coming into the world of employment after being in university? Did you have to learn this very quickly, or were people around you fairly supportive in getting you trained up?
My first job was actually terrible, like really, truly terrible. And like I had a really horrible boss. And I mean, it's not to dwell on the negativity too much, because, I learned a lot and I met absolutely fantastic people there. But I kind of suddenly think like you go into an environment where somebody's just constantly berating you for the quality of your work and not really helping you kind of get past the criticism. I think that's another thing for graduates, is probably just getting the right job and not. And I know that sounds like a really simplistic thing to say, but kind of not settling for a job that isn't right and just holding on and trying to find something which, an environment where you feel you can kind of, you're nurtured, basically. I know that's a really cheesy thing to say, but. So
for people listening to this who might be thinking, I would love to have a place that would nurture me, but I've applied for 5, 10, 15 jobs and so far nobody's taking me. What would your advice be to them to try and find the right place that will nurture them?
Yeah, it's really hard. It is really hard. And I kind of think after you graduate as well, you're on a kind of, you've only got a year, because then there's a whole new wave of graduates coming out. And if you don't find something that's right, you end up you take what you have to take. And I think you just do need to, having said all that about finding the right place that nurtures you, you also do just need to get your first foot on the ladder. And
so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm potentially wondering is there value in talking about it from the design agency's point of view? Because some of the work that I've done in the past and the courses I've taken on pitching yourselves as a freelancer, it's very much, if you're just going agency after agency and saying, this is what I can do, they'll be like, yeah, great. What agencies want to know is like, what do you know about us? How do we connect? Why are you going to be a good employee? And when you're able to do that, you got a much more likely chance of being accepted than if you're just sending out a blank CV where you obviously copy and pasted the name.
I think you've summed that up perfectly, actually. Yeah, I think it's really, really knowing all about the company that you're applying to and making those choices based on that. And anything you can do that just shows a real clear understanding of who you're applying to that's hugely advantageous, yeah.
So what are the companies looking for?
Well, I think it depends. I think it depends on the company. I just think, to me, really, the main thing is passion, really, more than anything else, more than technical ability, kind of great ideas, but a real kind of passion to kind of develop themselves and further their skills. That's absolutely 100% what excites me in graduates every time. And when you have a kind of junior designer who just cares so much and is kind of showing you stuff that they're really interested in, and it's just so much. It's really kind of electrifying, and you get really excited by what they do, and I think that you could, anyone can really learn those technical skills, but I think if you don't have that underlying passion, it's. So
how do they show the passion? Is it through personal projects? Is it through?
Yeah, and just you can just, I think you can just see it. I think when they're just constantly showing you work they've done, they're coming to you with ideas that they've come up with, or ways that they think things can be done, rather than just kind of waiting for you to potentially say, oh, just do this, do that. I kind of think it's brilliant when people respond when you're trying to help them, but I also think if they're coming back and they're just showing you things that they think it work really well, I think that's just infinitely better. And I kind of think as well, when you work with anyone who the minute that you're excited by what they can do, it's just fantastic. It's such a great kind of working relationship, I think, because you can kind of give them things and know it's going to come back 10 times better than you imagined, it would, and that's just so that's I think you're always better as a team, and I think that's that thing. I think if you just want people who are just really care and really will come back to you with something that just blows your socks off, basically.
In terms of the story, we've covered your first terrible job. Is there then a better job that follows that?
Yeah, I think then the kind of challenge is that I kind of worked 5 years at an agency, and I didn't really like any of the work that we'd done there. And that's then really hard, because I think this is true, that you kind of get hired for the kind of work that you've done. So you have to kind of do the work you want to do in order, obviously, to do more of that kind of work. So I think leaving a place after 5 years and really trying to, just thinking I need to try and kind of take a step up here, because this has just been not an agency that I was proud to work for. I wasn't proud of the work that we were really doing. It was really commercial, and it was just really kind of horribly compromised. And I kind of think the way to do that, the way I did that, was kind of trying to do like personal projects that could kind of fill out my portfolio with kind of different bits of work that I kind of felt was closer to what I wanted to do. Even reworking like small details of some of the bigger projects I'd done, where there were bits that were broadly fine, but I just thought there's things that could be improved upon, and just kind of reworking a few little bits just to kind of fine tune those and really kind of get them into more of a kind of where I felt they could be, and then from that it was quite a big leap going freelance, because I kind of had this portfolio of work that was okay, and I was starting to get into kind of better agencies. But then I kind of realised, again, just like upon graduating, you're actually quite poorly prepared to kind of work in an agency which is really much more kind of design centered and work at a much higher level from a design point of view. And I kind of think that was a real challenge as well. And there were definitely some failings, definitely some huge failings there along the way. It's just that thing of you're in at the deep end and you've got no choice but to do it, because I mean, the idea of failure is just, or the idea of these places almost like rejecting your work is so terrifying.
So at this point, you'd been working for an agency for 5 years, and you stepped out on your own and went freelance, is that right?
Yes, yeah.
How was that? Was that quite scary?
Yeah, well, I had some friends who did it ahead of me, and I kind of felt that really kind of gave me the confidence that now's the time and I can do it. And like a really good friend of mine sent me his portfolio, and I kind of saw how he'd laid it out in a way that wasn't going into really exhaustive detail with each project, but just really kind of picking the highlights. And that actually really taught me a lot about how to put mine together.
And was this a physical portfolio? Was it on a website?
Like a PDF, basically,
right,
just
okay.
a PDF of work.
And what year was this roughly?
This was 2010,
okay.
Or 2011 actually. And so then, yeah, from that point I kind of went freelance and just slowly got into more and more companies that I liked. Had some obviously some projects that went terribly, but you just have to kind of obviously pick yourself up, and slowly just got to a point where I was getting longer and longer contracts, and they were getting more and more extended, and I was actually thinking, okay, this is working. I can work in these agencies, and this is definitely starting to work out really nicely. And then off the back of that, I went to Pentagram as a freelancer about 3 years after I left the other job, and I've kind of been there for 8 years now, and it started as a freelance position. And I think it was just timed so well, because I'd kind of gone through all these kind of challenging agencies and kind of got to a place where I really wanted to be, and I was just so passionate about doing that that all kind of seemed to fall into place really nicely.
So when you were still working as a freelancer,
yeah,
obviously that's quite a competitive world. There's quite a lot of freelancers out there who, some of them, they have great work, but they're not getting very much paid opportunities because they don't really know how to put themselves out there. They don't know what makes them different to other freelancers. So how did you stand out? How were you getting work when there were other people out there who perhaps weren't getting the work?
Initially just through an agency, so getting an agency who had a whole load of contacts, and then I think once you've started to do that and you've started to get your foot in the door, I think particularly in London it's such the kind of design world's quite small. You start to get recommendations. People will say, oh well, these guys are looking for somewhere, so as one contract finishes, you can kind of get pointed in the direction of another. And actually, another thing to possibly mention as a challenge as well is I kind of worked for this hardcore kind of German book designer, knowing very, very little about kind of page layout and this specific kind of typography, and that nearly killed me, to be perfectly honest with you. But I think I learned so much in about 4 months working for him that was a real that really kind of was a step up in terms of what I was able to do. So that was almost like a kind of a boot camp for, like, design boot camp with a quite quite intense creative director. But I think that was a really good thing to.
Sure. So you were living in London at this point, all right?
Yes, yeah.
And were you going to meetups? Was there anything like that?
More within the agencies themselves than because I found that really interesting in York, because I think there's a really interesting creative kind of scene in York, and people like yourself who are doing all these kind of great initiatives, and there are these meetups. There's a real kind of good kind of atmosphere between all of the agencies, and you actually see agencies liking each other's work on Instagram, sharing each other's work on Instagram, like being really positive about each other's work. You think this is fantastic, and you kind of think this is kind of very different to. I can't imagine a lot of the kind of agencies in London who can be really quite bitchy about each other's work, and I almost think I can't imagine, like, you know, one agency being that positive about another's work, even to the extent of sharing it on their own feed, is just, I think it's brilliant. I think it's, so that's, I actually find that really inspiring about York, and that's a lovely break actually from, you know, nearly 18 years in London. So,
wow.
Yeah.
So what prompted the move to York?
I guess it's that standard. It's obviously the thing with COVID in 2020, where we'd been wanting to move up for a while. My wife and I both come from, I grew up in Harrogate, or near Harrogate, a little village, and my wife's from East Yorkshire, so we had so much family here, and we've got 2 kids, and we just felt this is the time we want them to be, you know, closer to all of their grandparents and all that kind of thing. So that prompted the move, and just the realization that also we could work remotely, which we just didn't know before COVID, until we all had to do that and we were forced to do it. And yeah.
So you mentioned grandparents. When I was looking on Instagram, is your dad a metal worker?
He is,
right?
yeah, that's right, yeah.
So I saw that and saw his page and had a little dig through. So was it very much, do you feel creativity is in your family? Is it in your blood?
Yeah, I don't know about in my blood, but it's definitely, my mum's an artist actually as well, but yeah, my dad is a metal worker, and from a really young age actually, he set me up in his workshop with a little bench with a load of like little tools and stuff. So I kind of had like an actual, like a proper hammer and pliers and stuff in my hand from, you know, probably from about 2, but it's probably like quite dangerous parenting in a way, but and really like working in his workshop from, you know, 4 or 5 or something, like just with a little, you know, saw and a bench block and stuff, and even like making Christmas decorations out of metal, like when I was like really young, like stamping letters and stuff into metal. So that's definitely a huge influence, yeah. And my mum's a really, she's full time as an artist now, but she was a teacher then, but she was really kind of, she's always been like recreationally an artist as well, you know, very artistic. So did a lot of stuff with her and a lot of kind of making things with my dad. I got a bit obsessed with like making toy guns for a while.
Cool.
He's like a massive pacifist. I don't know why he supported that, but somehow he did. Yeah, so many projects I've done with my dad over the years actually, that's definitely really fed into a kind of love of making things, for sure.
And is that something you're hoping to pass on to your kids?
Well, our daughter, I kind of think she's a natural graphic designer. I'm convinced she's a natural graphic designer, and she's got no interest in it whatsoever. And I keep saying, like, you could do this, I guess, and she just doesn't want to. She kind of wants to be a singer. So, but she does like really cool things. Like she'll just make bits of type out of Lego, and you just think that's just beautiful. It's so, or make a code with like putting squares around letters, and just kind of real like graphic design thinking from a 7-year-old. I just constantly think she's got it if she wants to, but I think she's wants to be a pop star, so what can you do?
Well, still creative.
Yeah.
So Harry Pearce, when did he enter your life? So
this is the partner who I work for at Pentagram, who's just been a really kind of inspirational kind of leader since I've worked there, and probably I think that's definitely in terms of moving myself forward as a designer, or moving forward as a designer. I think under this kind of, he's just a really kind of great designer, and just a really nice guy as well, and just somebody who's created a small team that just everybody has real kind of like both faith in him and just generally in each other. And yeah, I think that's essentially that's when I started at Pentagram, and having no idea what to expect on the first day and being really daunted to walk into this studio and just meeting this guy who was just the most open, kind of calm, relaxed, kind of knows exactly what he wants in a design sense, but it was just so different to anywhere else I'd worked, and also to meet somebody at such a kind of senior level who was so into like the details of typography and really into like the small things. I was just like, yeah, that was a real kind of eye opener, I think, and that he's definitely been a huge influence over the last 8 years.
So, what was it that attracted you to Pentagram in particular?
Well, I think there's a lot of companies out there who kind of do really great work, and I personally just think Pentagram are one. They're one of many, but it was a company since I graduated I was really interested in, and I kind of they have. It's a multidisciplinary design company, so they have like product designers, they have architects, they have sound designers, writers. So it's really broad in what they're able to do, and that's definitely a big attraction. That we work on projects with 3D designers, and say for example, if we're designing a perfume range, they will design the bottle, they will design the physical packaging, there's so much around that. If we're designing a campaign, there's a sound designer who will do that side of it. And I kind of think that all of that kind of multidisciplinary kind of approach under one roof is just really exciting.
Yeah. So it always fascinates me when you get particularly people who work in branding and storytelling and things like that, agencies who help other companies tell their stories, and then sometimes they forget about their own brand and about looking after their own staff and things like that. So how would you describe the culture in Pentagram? You described it a little bit, but
it's really, really good. Yeah, really good. I think it has this. Another thing which is appealing about it has this kind of illusion of being this huge agency, but actually it's just a series of really small teams. So our team is 4 designers. Most teams don't go above like 6 or 7, and they kind of run all their own projects within those teams. So there's the idea, this illusion of being really large, but it's actually quite an intimate kind of working environment. And then there's really nice like cultural things, like there's a chef and there's a kitchen, so every day everybody has lunch together, and you all kind of go down at an allotted time, and everybody eats together, and you just talk to all different people within the agency. And that's a really nice. I think that's a really nice cultural thing. It's just the number of different things. Like it's a design studio that has a functioning workshop in it, which just immediately appealed to me. Obviously, because my dad's a metal worker, and just you can walk in and see people actually making things in 3D in a workshop, and that's beautiful.
So it sounds like they're quite good at nurturing their staff and actually bringing out the creativity within people, instead of perhaps what your first job felt like, which is very much almost slave driver. You must do this better. Yeah. And do you feel like the nurturing approach gets better work out of you and the staff? 100%,
yeah, 100%. And that's something whenever I'm working with a more junior designer, it's just making sure they feel comfortable in what they're doing. They feel safe to make mistakes. I think it's 100%. And when you encourage people, I just think you get so much more out of them than if you're just constantly telling people what they're doing. It's just rubbish, because I think it is a personal thing, isn't it? Creating things, and you put a lot of yourself into it. And if you just constantly, if you're encouraged, I just think it's so much more. It gets so much more out of people. Absolutely.
So let's talk about some of the risks then, because you work with very large clients, including John Lewis, Old Vic, Floyd Records, to name just a few of them. And when working with huge clients and huge budgets, often people who are starting out, they all think they want the big budgets, but then they don't realise with the big budgets come a large amount of risk. So talk me through that. Talk me through the risks of working with these clients and the impact that it can have on their business and their livelihoods.
I think with large clients, it's one thing that's really difficult is the layers of sign-off that you have to go through to get anything through creatively. So I think that's one thing. Suddenly you're, rather than dealing perhaps with, although on a client level you might be dealing with individuals, you're also dealing with this huge unwieldy organisation, and to kind of get something approved, it has to go through all these kind of stages of approval, and that's really, really tricky. I think obviously when things are more visible, that I think that as a designer, that's quite daunting, because people are going to see it, people are going to comment on it, and if people hate it, you can't help but take that personally.
But people always hate change.
Yeah, and people always hate change. And and I think that's something I mentioned just earlier as well, that this idea that people develop really emotional kind of relationships with brands that they love, and they react quite strongly when a brand changes without their permission. If they love a brand and suddenly the logo's different, they can they can really get very very aggro about that. And that's and now obviously with the internet, people have the platforms to kind of really make their feelings known as well. So you're going to hear it if people hate it, and that's one aspect of it, of risk. But then reward is the fact that you just think, well, you're working with an amazing company, and you can really help to move that company forward, and you can make real change to the way that they do things. And that's the flip side, which I think is just really exciting and far outweighs the risk every time.
So what attracts you to the brands that you want to spend your money with? Because it's very difficult. If a brand exists now and it just sells a commodity, then the only way you can compete on that is with price, and that's a very difficult race to the bottom. And so for everybody else who doesn't want to compete on price, you've got to be able to tell your story in a way that connects with people. So what is it you look for in those brands? It's
just a sense of purpose, I suppose. I think as long as you know knowing what a brand stands for is a really powerful thing. And as you say, knowing if there's a compelling story that kind of underlines everything in the way that they behave. I think one thing that you said there is authenticity. I think that's really, really important. You have to feel that whatever a brand's doing, that's something that they really believe in. That's something that they really stand for. So seeing that they're doing all those different things that kind of support that I think that's hugely important. I think that's probably the most important thing that a brand can have, really, is a sense of authenticity.
So we spent a bit of time talking about the risks in terms of changing things and people getting upset about it. But we then talked about the benefit. So you can work with a brand and you can have really positive impact on them, make a difference on their business, and that's quite fulfilling to you. Perhaps let's spend a few minutes talking about one of the projects you mentioned in the pre-production form, which is We the 15.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that is and the work you did for them?
Yeah, so We the 15 is a inclusivity movement for people with disabilities. It all kind of stems from one fundamental insight that 1 in 6 people globally have some form of disability. So they're the kind of largest, almost unrepresented group imaginable, really. And there's this idea that it was working with the IPC, so that's the International Paralympic Committee. They were working with an advertising agency called Adam and Eve on a number of things, and they approached us to help create a brand for what they described as a kind of global movement. And essentially, in the first instance, it's just raising awareness of the fact that these people are marginalised and kind of getting much better opportunities for people with disabilities, and bringing all those issues to the fore. So the work we did with them particularly was on their brand identity, and it was probably quite interesting because so they describe themselves as a movement, and we thought that was really interesting, like a global movement. And we kind of, when we were doing the design for this, we really thought about what are the qualities of kind of identities for global movements. And when you think of things like Extinction Rebellion or CND, well, a real quality of those kind of marks, those logotypes, is that they can be created by anyone, anywhere. They're just incredibly simple things. They can be drawn, by hand on a banner. They can be, drawn on pen on someone's face, and that's really important for something like that, because then ownership of that graphic identity, it's not kind of held by a kind of brand guardians. It's owned by anybody who wants to implement it. Anybody who wants to kind of make a banner can do so. So the first thing we did was we looked at a whole number of routes for this, but we tried to kind of create something that was a mark that was as kind of singular and as iconic as something like, or at least as simple as something like Extinction Rebellion and CND. And really the fact that 1 in 6 people, 15% of the world, that's where the name comes from, We the 15, have some form of disability. We ended up representing it after all kinds of creative exploration. We just came down to, effectively, it's a pie chart. It's a circle with a sixth of the thing highlighted, and it's tilted at a 23.5 degree axis, which reflects the tilt of the Earth's axis. But it's just a really simple mark that can be taken by anyone and used by anyone. And we paired it with a really simple logo type, which is basically just built from Helvetica. So it's like a typeface which is on, millions of computers around the world. It's effectively available to anyone. And it was quite, I suppose it's really quite a simple thing that we created, which was then taken on. It's purple as well, which is the international colour of disability, which was then taken on this kind of huge journey by all these different people who kind of implemented it and worked with it. So, for example, for the launch, those like 200 really iconic landmarks around the world were coloured purple, which is obviously the colour of disability, and they had the symbol projected on them, and that was everything from the Colosseum in Rome to the Niagara Falls to the Houses of Parliament, I believe. There's all these different kind of really kind of super iconic buildings, Natural History Museum, Rainbow Bridge in Japan, just on and on. It's this incredible thing that just gained so much momentum. And that was part of the launch, and it was just incredible that you start with something which is just basically a circle with a triangle cut out of it, and it's suddenly starting to gain all this momentum and starting to stand for this much kind of bigger thing. It was also part of the Paralympics opening ceremony, so there was a kind of they for the opening ceremony the symbol was a huge part of the opening ceremony. They made the whole stadium purple. They had people in We the 15 uniforms. Athletes were kind of wearing it as like temporary tattoos. All the athletes who were competing in the Paralympics were given like a little pack. Part of that was a little purple We the 15 tattoo, and that was quite cool. That there was like swimmers and horse riders and stuff who were actually kind of, when they're in the pools, they were holding up this symbol, which just started as this tiny little thing. And that to me is one of the most exciting projects I've worked on. Just that, I think what we did was really very little. It was a really simple mark, but it just helped to give a focus for all this activity, and to see it have that kind of life. Like I was just watching the Paralympics opening ceremony and just kind of seeing this thing on that scale. It was just.
And how did that feel, knowing that you'd worked on that?
It's kind of, I guess, quite surreal in a way, and not. It's not like a big ego thing at all. It really isn't. You just kind of look, you think that's we did that, but it's so many people that brought it to that, and obviously we were just a tiny part. And I was a really tiny part as one person, and it's just great, really. It's really satisfying that it's there and it's kind of taken off. But
and that's the power that good design can have. And as he said, the work you did was quite simple, and sometimes people mistake the work that designers do and think it has to be complex. Think if people are paying a large amount of money, then they deserve to have something which looks like it's had a lot of time spent on it. But that's not the point at all. The point isn't to make something that looks like it's had lots of time spent on it. It's, as you said earlier, it's to be able to describe, okay, why is it this percentage of the pie chart cut out? Why is it at this angle? Why is it in this colour? And just hearing you explain all the work that you've done, you can tell the excitement and the research that you've done and the care and attention that you've put into creating this thing.
Definitely, yeah. Definitely. I think that's a really key point as well. I think that's probably a really important part of design, is just stripping away everything but the essential, like the essential parts of a story, the essential parts of a narrative, the essential parts of a logo type. I think removing complexity it can only lead to kind of clearer communication. So yeah, I think that's hugely important. Yeah.
So there's a question that I always want to ask, but I don't always get the chance to spring it up on people. But given what we've just been talking about, I think I can go ahead and ask it. So what's your definition of a fulfilled life?
A fulfilled life? For me, honestly, it's just time with my kids and my family. That's really it. Like, I would never ask for anything more than that. Like, that's really 100%. Design's great. It's something I love, and I love the fact that I have a job that I do, which I find rewarding, and it's something that I'm continually interested in. But yeah, really, if I stripped away everything, if I've just got my family and my kids, that's it. I'm happy. Like, I couldn't ask for anything more.
That's quite a beautiful answer.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know where that came from.
No, that's fine.
Sprung it on me, and you got a bit of.
I got the honest answer, which is the one that I want. So, what advice would you give to people at the start of their creative journey then?
So, I think there's a really great J.G. Ballard quote, which is just be faithful to your obsessions. That's always kind of struck a chord with me. I just think you have to find the things you love and just go after them, kind of quite relentlessly, and that's as simple as that.
Cool. So if people want to see the work that you've done, where do they go to see it?
Well, the work that I do in my day job is Pentagram, pentagram.com.
And if they want to see that playful Instagram that I mentioned
if they want
at the
to see
beginning?
that playful Instagram of shots of essentially nothing, it's Johannes.Grimmond at Instagram.
Awesome. Well, we can put the links in the description so people can just click through.
Fine. Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much for doing this.